Incoming transmission from the future, Vancouver AI Community Meetup.
The only reason I'm not introducing her properly is how do you introduce somebody who has such vast experience? I could never do you justice, Judy Illes. Thank you so much. Please come say hello. Thank you. If you want this, you can use it, or you can just wander.
I'd love it to go away, actually. I actually am going to stand in the dark because I want you to be able to see my slides. I have never given a talk after a beatboxer. Don't you want to hear more of him than listen to me? That was amazing. Amazing, amazing. So in the past hour or so, I've heard some really interesting themes that I hope I can bring back to you. But I heard brain fix, I heard rights, I heard agency, I heard healthcare, I heard anticipation, futures, leadership, authenticity, passion. I've heard that all night and even before, and all about advanced technology. And so these are themes that I didn't know I was going to hear about. I'm a newbie to this community. But I really appreciate that they precede me and what I hope to share with you in the next 10 minutes or so. So I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a professor of neurology at UBC. My specialization is in neuroethics. This is a field that was designed or created about 25 years ago to explicitly align human values and human priorities alongside advances in neurotechnology. There were a few of us who got together who thought, you know, philosophers and legal scholars have been thinking about mind and brain for a really long time, but it's time for people within the neurosciences to sort of take on that ethics charge and think about it from the inside out. And so I want to talk a little bit about that with you today. It's really like the 60,000 foot layer of what we're going to be looking at and talking about what I could possibly share with you, but maybe we'll have some time afterwards to follow up. So Kevin and I are going to work together on my slides, and Kevin's going to be my remote. So thank you for anticipating that. So this is Chris at the Whistler Institute, about a month ago in Whistler, and I was just so fascinated to hear about all the work that this community, all of you are doing, and the leadership that BC is providing on the AI landscape. And I did, in fact, challenge Chris and asked about where humility and human intuition intersect with AI, and then we ended up having a very long evening together, speaking with one another, with my husband Mike Vanderloos, who's here, with a Silicon Valley venture capitalist from California, about where these concepts might intersect. And so that's what I want to share with you today, and we'll go to the next slide. And so the first thing I want to talk about is responsibility. And I think responsibility comes with possibility. And so we're going to go into a quick little history lesson about neuroscience before we could ever talk about where AI and neuroscience and brain technologies in particular all kind of come together in this beautiful stew of ideas and possibilities. So we'll go to the next slide. And let me just share with you that this year, 2025, is the 60th anniversary of modern neuroscience. But, you know, people have been interested in the brain for a really, really long time, like long enough to be thinking about the Sumerians in 4000 BC, who first noticed the euphoric effects of the poppy plant. The papyrus that gave us the first written record of the nervous system. And just to remind you, when we talk about the central nervous system, we're talking about the brain and the spinal cord. We have the first description of 500 BC of the optic nerve, right? The nerve that gives us vision and allows us to see. And even Hippocrates, to whom we attribute the oath of ethics in medicine and healthcare, actually talked about epilepsy as a brain disturbance as early as 360 BC. Let's go on, super fast forward in time. Who doesn't love a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, who used to rob graves for his art business? And so he loved brains, as I love brains and the central nervous system, and he also, of course, created beautiful art depictions of other parts of the human anatomy, and he would in fact take the cadavers, he would dissect them together with his colleagues, and we believe he would restore them to their grave sites. And this is just one image from his brain drawings, of which there are many to enjoy if you look them up. Let's go to a next slide. Now, who doesn't love a beautiful brain cell in the brain? And this is one that was drawn by Ramon y Cajal, who's considered the father of modern neuroscience. He won the Nobel Prize for his depictions. This is a cell called a Purkinje cell. It populates the back of the brain in an area called the cerebellum that allows us to have coordinated movements, along with other cells in the human brain. So 1852 is where we have Ramon y Cajal, and through his death in 1934, a tremendous scholar and also a mentor for young people interested in the neurosciences. He just really laid it, he gave it all. He really gave it all. Let's go on to the next slide. So now, fast forward to today. This is a beautiful slide of cells of the brain in the visual cortex, ocular dominance columns, also allowing us to see. These are cells using optical imaging, produced by colleagues at the Allen Institute. Let's go on and ask the question, why did these ancients and those who preceded us, and why today are we so interested in studying the human brain? What's up? Well, it is who we are. It is what makes us agents and have identities and personalities and be unique and the same and distinct from one another. And so there's an element of curiosity at the end of the day, but there also is an element of wanting to discover why we behave the way we do, how we interact with one another, how we're empathic with one another, why we love, why we hate. And so we go on with our studies to think about how we respond to external stimuli as well as internal stimuli. And there are different ways that we can do that, and let's go to the next slide. So EEG recordings have been around. It probably was one of the first ways of imaging the human brain that I can think of. Radiography is old. It's probably 120 years old. Hans Berger in the 1920s actually created electrical images of the brain using electrodes far fewer and less sophisticated than these. Here on the right, we see some images of recordings from the brain shown by the IEEE. These are some aluminum high-density channels, 128 channels on the brain that give us electrical signals from the brain. I was around, well, I won't tell you how long ago, but let's just say this is a kind of a modern contraption to putting electrodes, 256 channels on the brain. You can plop them on with a really good glue. When I was doing this in my 20s, we actually had to scrape the scalp one by one with the sharp end of a Q-tip. And by the time you got to 250, number one was pretty dry. So it took a while, but we got the job done. Each of these channels will actually give a unique signal from the brain, even though they seem that they're so close together. Let's go on to the next slide. So I'm going to show you this really dated slide, and it's really not to brag, it's just really funny. So when I was doing this high-density imaging work, recording electrical signals from the brain, one of the things we were interested in was how to predict human performance accuracy. We did a pretty good job of it, and I'll go to the next slide. But I just want to show you, in 1999, this was modern AI technology. It looks so hokey to me today. It's just, I'm almost embarrassed to show it to you. But we were using covariance patterns from signals acquired from different channels on the brain, and then using colors and thicknesses to show how they related to one another. And in fact, these were one of the first images of what we call today the human connectome. The networks in the brain that all work together to allow us to be who we are, to respond to internal and external stimuli. And we have beautiful, far more beautiful images than this. Kevin, you're on. such as this, and this is the connectome. It is gorgeous, isn't it? And it really shows the way that the different parts of the brain are connected. These are pathways described by the way the water is organized in the brain by colleagues down in Los Angeles, and funded by, and I want to give a shout out to the NIH that's really having a hard go at things right now, enabled by funding from the National Institutes of Health, bringing these kind of beautiful images and discoveries to life for us today. Let's go on. There's another reason that we want to study the brain. So we have curiosity. We want to understand how people behave and why they behave the way they do. And of course, those of us working in the field, especially in healthcare, want to help alleviate the burden of neurologic and psychiatric disease on a worldwide scale. And here you see, I just took this from the website of the World Health Organization, that the number and cost of neurologic diseases today is just immense. And let's just go on. We've been using AI, since probably the 70s and 80s, and of course in the 90s, to try to develop technologies to alleviate diseases of the brain like Parkinson's disease and other kinds of diseases that involve the neurodegeneration of cells and pathways in the brain, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and myotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is actually a target of some of the studies of Neuralink today. And this is just a beautiful slide from the Cleveland Clinic. Let's go on. We are also able to use imaging of the way that blood is oxygenated in the brain, and the brain uses sugars to specific regions when a human person is responding to a certain stimuli. Also technology enabled by AI. And this is a very simple bold, so blood oxygenation level dependent experiment showing what happens when somebody simply moves a limb, like fingers, on command. But imagine if we could use AI, next slide, Kevin, thank you, in a supercharged context. And this is where AI is really playing a role in helping us to understand human consciousness. Now imagine that you know someone or you have a loved one who is in a disordered state of consciousness where they are unable to respond clinically to your requests or your commands. They seem to be in a coma-like or persistent vegetative state. Now imagine with our oxygen level measurements or our electro measurements or our heat measurements, we could actually use AI as a proxy signal, or to produce a proxy signal, that there is actually some kind of intention going on in the brains of those individuals who are unable to respond to our clinical exam. And imagine if we use those proxy signals and allowed someone to express their desire as to whether they want to continue or discontinue treatment, or whether they want to live or to die. This is the kind of power that we're seeing in the AI space and that all of you are innovating and contributing to today.
Excuse me, would that affect Alzheimer's?
No, it's a good question. That's Wanda, yes. Right? You know, I don't know. Maybe my colleagues here, do we have AI studies of imaging of Alzheimer's where intentions of an Alzheimer's person have been decoded using AI? I can't think of a study, but I don't know why the technology could not go in that direction. We certainly see AI studies of a memory dysfunction, for example. There was a recent study of changes in memory in people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. So Alzheimer's is a little bit different because there's a downward pattern ultimately, a degenerative pattern. So it's an excellent question, thank you. Thank you for being so bold and interrupting me, I love it. No, I like it. I like being challenged. Okay, my group knows. Okay, let's go on. Oh, yes. And there's also this commercial application where you can go and buy gadgets in big box stores to try to stimulate your brain to make you, oh, this projector is about to die. Think faster, respond more accurately. And if I could have my props, please. Thank you. So these are the kind of gadgets I acquire. People give me gifts these days. So books and gadgets. This is a really old school one. You can see it even has the electrodes, a whole bunch of electrodes attached to them. And Mike, I'm going to give you this. This is actually a Canadian-made headset, and it's pretty cool. Yeah. I like it. And so I'll just say, these kinds of wearable devices really can give you feedback about the kind of state that you're in, whether you're resting, whether you're excited like I am to be here with you, whether you're a little intimidated. There are different kinds of brain signals that these gadgets will actually produce. What they won't do, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, thank you very much, that they're going to tell you what I'm about to tell you next. They just don't have that kind of capability. So they're good at giving us emotional signals or reading emotional signals. Some have been introduced for trying to help people think better, especially kids with reading disorders, dyslexia, autism, and so forth. But they're not so good at mind control as sometimes we see in the media. Oh, thank you. So we're going to go on and try to get through this before the projector dies on me. Next slide, please. So with possibility comes humility. Is there anything we can do about the slides? Okay, if anybody has epilepsy, can you just leave for a few minutes, and then I'll tell you when you can come back. Because we don't want to have a clinical crisis in my talk. We hate that when that happens. So after Chris and I started talking about humility and intuition, I absolutely couldn't let it go. And I also didn't know he was going to invite me to give this talk. So this is just very special for me. What do I mean by humility? Next slide, Kevin. I think about, as we innovate, as you innovate in your AI space, thinking about and learning from lessons of the past, scrutinizing authentically and with passion your design, whether it's scientific or it's creative or it's commercial, promising to the limits of promise and not over sensationalizing, being transparent and about what you're doing, what the promises are, as well as what the limitations are. We all have a lot to learn from each other, including where our failures exist. We have as much to learn from our failures as we have to do from the successes of one another. Follow through is super important, especially when it comes to patients or people you may enroll in your studies. You got to stick by them. You can't just abandon people once they've given of themselves to assist you in your work. And then communication and outreach, well, like this. We need to talk to one another, and we need to be out in the public, ensuring the public understands what's going on in our space, what's real and what's Memorex, and what we need to really look forward to in the future. Next slide, please. I just want to say there's a lot of governance and discourse going around in the world. World Health Organization around brain technologies is particularly interested in health. Next slide. UNESCO is particularly interested in science and education and where neurotechnology will intersect with the future and regulation. Next slide. Just as a heads up, UNESCO has a wonderful publication specifically on ethics and AI. Those of you in this community I imagine will be very interested in reading that. Next slide. There are other players in the world. Amnesty International is really interested in the rights-based questions around brain technologies. And one of the things that they're dancing with is whether we need new human rights frameworks to regulate neurotechnology, including how it involves AI, and whether there should be criminal codes. There's a movement around the world now to criminalize innovators if they step or cross the line of privacy, data hijacking, and so forth. So it's sort of the rights argument and the rights debates are very hot right now. You might want to tune into those if you're interested. Next slide. This is a wonderful community. I don't know what's going to happen to it in the next few weeks, I have to say, but the FDA got together with people of academic institutions and industry and patient stakeholders to talk about brain-computer interfaces. These are implantable devices in the brain to help people with Alzheimer's disease, spinal cord injury, and so forth. And it is a truly collaborative community. I hope we can stand and withstand some of the pressures around us now. And finally, in this segment, thank you, Kevin, colleagues and I created principles for innovation in neurotechnology using STS, science, technology, and society, principles around responsible innovation. And we published that in the Canadian Journal of Neurological Sciences, and you can find it easily, or you can just ask me and I'll push it to you. So that's my thing around humility. And we're going to come to the end. And what happens with humility? We also need human intuition. And what do I mean by that? And human intuition, Chris, continuing our conversation, is the human override, where we look at the output of your AI algorithms, machine learning algorithms, and you say, is this real? Does this really make sense? Does it compute? And if there's one thing that, there's very little that's black and white in ethics, but it's the following principles, Kevin. It's ensuring that we do good, ensuring that we respect each other, we ensure that people have the right to their own data and that it's not taken away from us without our permission, and that we have decision-making capacity within a scenario of our cultural background, our belief systems, our values, and priorities. With that said, I want to give a shout out to my amazing group. Make a little bit of noise. There we go. You guys are talking about passion. This is a team that just exudes passion day in and day out. I'm so privileged to work with them. Shout out to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people for giving us the privilege of being here at the McMillan Center with its good projector on these beautiful lands. And to Marianne Bakani, whose beautiful graphics I was able to share with you today. At the end of the day, last slide, for brains, technology, and AI, I feel it's about responsibility, intuition, and humility, and the future is in our hands. Let's see where we take it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Judy. Sure. Beautiful, beautiful presentation. Hang out for a sec. We got some questions from the audience, but we have a special facilitator of the Q&A. I'd like to invite Mike up to the stage.
Oh, fun.
You guys are going to share that one. I'm going to be the guy that runs around. Mike, will you facilitate some Q&A for 5 minutes?
Sure, yes.
Maybe introduce yourself real quick.
Okay, I'm Mike Vanderloos. I'm recently retired from UBC in mechanical engineering, where I had the privilege of running a robotics lab, and also I'm working a bit in roboethics. You can guess where that came from. Okay.
Who has a burning question here?
Now they do.
Kush, man,
Okay.
I was coming to you, Kush, for the wrap-up later, but I'm so excited you raised your hand.
Okay, yes.
Thank you so much for that absolutely, I'm right here, for that absolutely informative and inspiring talk. I'm going to look into some of the more recent research again. I've been always very interested. I almost purchased the OpenBCI headset, like 10 years ago and so on. And I'm wondering, at some point, I have two kind of questions. One is more philosophical or political. I don't know. One is more technical. You mentioned don't read into these headsets too much. They're mostly, sort of can tell you some good signals from your brain. And yes, I don't know about mind control so much, the output side, or the input side, but the output side. What do you think of the fMRI to image, the image stable diffusion style models being used to extract imagery out of brains? How effective do you think that is? Have you yourself found it to be somewhat progressing at a good rate? And this sort of the more technical side of it. What do your perspective as a practitioner? And the other is more, do you think research like this should be afforded, enabled for people like myself and like just random people to do on themselves, like ethically just on themselves, or should they be criminalized and devices like EEG or whatever else be made harder to access and so on? I find this a movement like that is happening in my other space of LLMs and AI. More and more people are trying to be private and closed source and not open. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Should people be enabled to do this and build upon and contribute?
Okay, thank you for that series of questions. Chris, you might have to bring the wedding cake into the room.
Those are the first positive things he's ever said at these meetups. This guy. That means he likes you.
Okay. Well, there was something about "I love you" earlier, so I'm waiting for one of those to come forward. Okay, you asked a lot of questions. So, in no particular order, I don't believe in criminalization in the scientific arena. There is occasionally a nefarious actor in our space. I am so much of a proponent of professional self-regulation through our communities, through our professional societies, and just in terms of cooperating with one another. I really don't want to see criminal codes interfering with innovation, particularly because I think they'll interfere with innovation that's for the benefit in the clinical arena, and we have a lot to solve in the clinical arena. So that's number one. I hope that was helpful. BCIs, I was around, this is also going to date me, but now you have a lot of information about how old I am. When, I don't know if you're old enough to know, there was a time that CT scans were being sold in the open marketplace. Are you old enough to know that? Okay, so this was a movement. It started in California, and then it actually spread all over the United States, and even came up to Canada, where you could go and you could purchase for yourself a CT scan. You could go to like the shopping mall, and you could have a head scan, a lung scan. You purchase it for yourself without prescription. You could have as many as you wanted because there was no regulation around it. You could have spring specials and Mother's Day specials. You could have a colonoscopy and a head scan in one shot. So that kind of went a little bit out of control. So I think there are limits to do-it-yourself technology. I think some of these wearable headsets, as long as you are informed and you are given the right information about what they can and cannot do, are fine. We as humans innovate all the time, right? That's how we got the wheel. That's how we got fire. So now we have headsets. If people want to use signals from their brain to regulate, I love to do yoga, but maybe somebody wants to wear a headset and regulate their breathing and their anxiety level. Some of them actually absolutely do work like that. Do we need to be afraid of over-reading signals? So you can't have for yourself an fMRI scan, right? This is a big Mongo machine, 3 Tesla. There are portable MRIs now that are being rolled out at less field strength, but they still require an infrastructure. Am I worried about controlling people through brain technologies? I'm less worried about it, and I think as a Canadian neuroscience community and neuroethics community, we are less worried about it than perhaps other countries. There's a lot of hype around this in the South. Now they're a bit distracted, but there's a lot of worry about that there. There is advances in speech decoding from people who have brain-computer interfaces and a degenerative disease that doesn't allow them to communicate. But these are limited, very constrained environments, laboratory environments, single person, maybe a few person experiments. There's a long way to go before you or I will ever have to worry about walking on the street and having our thoughts borrowed, hijacked, manipulated. Maybe it'll happen, but I don't think it's a today problem.
Just perhaps a footnote. I remember a paper you wrote that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but which 1,000? So pictures are really sexy, and they can be made to be manipulated, they can be made to look as if they are real, when actually it's just a chimera. So it's like what you said, it goes exactly to this point, is that you have to know how to interpret the images that you get and take it with a big grain of salt.
James, I pass the mic over you to there.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question about problems we've seen in social media around algorithms that feed you what you want and feed your brain that sugar high that it loves. And AI seems to be a yes man, likes to give you answers, makes you feel good. How do you see? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and where you see this maybe going and the ethics around it.
Maybe that'll be my title of my next talk, The Candy Cane of AI for the Brain. Or it's not bad. It's not bad. Okay. So I have maybe two answers. One is that we do know that social media use theories from neuroscience that we've learned about addiction, right? Social media and getting people to click constantly is very much based on release of dopamine in the brain. The more you release, the more you want, right? That's sort of how it goes. So there is a neuroscience of getting people to use social media, and it's very AI driven, right? These are algorithms that are purely driven by AI. Do I think that's a good thing? We're seeing a lot of mental health disorders, particularly among our youth today. So I think there has been maybe a lack of anticipation of where that could go wrong. And it's always hard to shove the horse back in the barn, right? It's impossible. So what we have to do is be proactive now in authentically addressing the fact there is a problem and we need to deal with it. There's one thing I want to share with you about social media, that it's a space I keep like tapping, I keep poking the bear, but I haven't yet like lunged the bear. and maybe that's a weird thing to say. So,
Lunge the bear.
Yeah, poster like. Chris brought up the conversation that I had with Neuralink. It was actually now many years ago. They came to me asking, sort of pursuing whether I'd be able to offer them ethics advice as they were advancing. There were a number of reasons I turned them down. The principal one that I shared with them was that they really needed somebody in the US regulatory space, not somebody in the Canadian regulatory space. And I didn't feel that I could serve them as well as somebody else. There were other reasons, but I think that was a completely top level one. There's one thing that worries me though about what's going on with companies like Neuralink. They're not the only ones. They just sort of seem to be on our radar, and that they are using social media to recruit patients to their clinical trials. And we've never seen that before. So companies that are outside the academic sector and don't get public funding are excluded from ethics oversight. So in UBC and all of the institutions, and academic institutions have ethics boards because we receive public funding. That provides a tremendous amount of oversight in terms of what we can and cannot do. Neuralink now is starting to open trials in Toronto with neurosurgeons there, and their oversight is the University Health Network. And I was just talking with the Canadian Press, a reporter from the Canadian Press the other day, and she was asking whether an institution like University of Toronto and that University Health Network can provide the oversight needed to ensure that the trials will be done properly in Ontario, and my answer was emphatically yes. What we don't have a good handle on is how people are being recruited in whatever it is, 140 characters or 280 characters now. And we have very strong rules around how we can recruit people to our studies, but there are no rules around recruiting to social media that I know of. And so when a company is recruiting at the same trial people with a spinal cord injury that's acquired from a trauma and that stabilizes over time, and at the same X thing, I don't know what it's called now, it used to be a tweet, now it's an X thing, recruiting people who are suffering from a fatal neurodegenerative disease, there is a disconnect for me, and that makes me very nervous. And whereas we know that consent forms, we've all signed them, are too long and too laborious and completely need to be blown up, this other way of recruiting through these very cryptic, not really transparent processes are equally concerning. I hope that answered your question. If not, we'll talk afterwards.
Let's give it up for Judy.